Good evening, everyone. We had a tech issue, so I am re-recording this shiur. The shiur is not live. It's going to be an abridged version of the shiur that we had, but hopefully it will cover the majority of the text as well as some of the discussion that came up throughout the live shiur. I will incorporate into our conversation. So let's begin. Last week we left off on Masechet Berachot, Daf Kaftet Amud Bet, 29B, and we're all the way 29BA, the first couple lines, the first line actually. So if you're looking in the art scroll, it's 29B 1 rather. 29B1 is the first on Kaftet Amud Aleph, or on the first line. Last time we had spoken about what happens if someone forgets to say Mashiva Racham Geshem? What happens in the Bracha Mechayim Mitim? What happens if someone forgets to say Eten Talon Mata Levracha in the Bracha of rain, or Baruch Aleinu? What happens if someone forgets to say Atachon Tanu, which is the Havdalah in the Bracha of Atachonet? So following that theme, tonight we are going to discuss what happens if someone forgets to say the bracha to Yaaleh Veyavo on Rosh Chodesh. So when it is Rosh Chodesh, there is a special insertion that someone says in the bracha of Retzeh. Retzeh Hashem Elokeinu L'Chayishav V'Yitzvatam Sheh V'Hashem Ha'avodah L'Dvir V'Techa. That you should return the avodah, the service, to the Beit HaMikdash. In that blessing of returning the service of the Beit HaMikdash is when we mention Yaaleh Veyavo, because on Rosh Chodesh there were certain offerings that would be brought in the Beit HaMikdash that we no longer have. So in the bracha related to the avodah, which is the service of the sacrifices and the offerings of the Beit HaMikdash, it's called avodah. That's the bracha of Retzeh. We have in that bracha we have a special insertion of the Yaaleh Veyavo for Rosh Chodesh, and the question is, what happens if someone forgets it? Someone forgot to say Yaaleh Veyavo on Rosh Chodesh. What's the rule? What should they do? Now, this question actually, interestingly enough, there could be many answers to it. And it's actually pretty confusing. There will be times where it's fine, you forgot it, it's okay, you don't need to do anything different, you don't need to go back and say anything again. There'll be times where you just, wherever you are, you just say Yaaleh Veyavo. There'll be times where you go back to the beginning of the Bracha B'Ritzeh, and there are times where you go back to the beginning of the Amidah. So there's really like four potential solutions. It's just, you forgot it, so say Yaaleh Veyavo, or go back to the beginning of Ritzeh and get a running start before you say Yaaleh Veyavo, or go back to the beginning and pray the entire Amidah again, including Yaaleh Veyavo, or just leave it, it's fine, you forgot. And we're going to talk about now those four solutions of when each one would apply. And there's like this joke that I had mentioned, is that there was someone that asked the rabbi, really to in a asked in a negative way, asking like, what do you do if you forgot to say Yaaleh Veyavo? Knowing that there's so many different answers and that it's not a simple question to answer. So what do you do if you forgot to say Yaaleh Veyavo? And his answer was, it's not a valid question for me, and it's not a valid question for you. It's not a valid question for me because I won't forget. I'll pay attention and I won't forget it the first time. And it's not a valid question for you because you, even if you forget to say it once, you're going to forget to say it a second time anyway. So don't even bother saying anything. So if you forgot, you forgot, because there's nothing. Even if you were to go back and say it again, you'd forget again. Almost like tongue in cheek. But we're going to talk about that tonight. About what to do if someone misses Yaaleh Veyavo. So let's go. Let's share screen. Here we are. We are picking up in Masechet Berachot of Kaftet Amud Bet 29B, right at the very top. It's the sixth word on the first line. Amar Rabbi Tanchum, Amar Rabbi Yaseh, Amar Rabbi Shua ben Levi. So there's a statement by Rabbi Shua ben Levi, and he says as follows: Ta'a velo hiskir shel Rosh Chodesh ba'avodah. If someone made a mistake, ta'a means he made a mistake. Velo hiskir shel Rosh Chodesh, and he didn't mention that special insertion of Rosh Chodesh, meaning Yaaleh Veyavo, ba'avodah, and the bracha of avodah. Avodah, as I mentioned, is referring to the bracha B'Ritzeh. Choser la'avodah. So he goes back to Retzeh to say it. Just to show you the sidur. This is the sidur that we pray from, the Sephardic sidur. It says Retzeh Hashem Elokeinu V'Yisav V'Yitzvatan She'ayeh, which means Hashem, you should turn to and accept our prayers. V'Hashev ha'avodah. I want to highlight this for you. This one, Hashev ha'avodah. It's not the right color to highlight with. My apologies. But here, V'hashev ha'avodah, return the service, lidvir betecha, to the Beit HaMikdash, v'ishei Yisrael utfilatam, and the offerings that Israel brings, as well as their prayers, mehirav v'avat kibul v'ratzon, you should accept. So again, the service that your people are doing, you should be accepting. So this is where you see the word avodah means the services, and right in there, having to do with services, we have on Rosh Chodesh, you would say this special insertion, Eloheinu v'le'avotinu Yaaleh Veyavo v'yagia v'yira'eh. And if you go down a little bit more, this is actually the extra line we would say on Berosh Chodesh. You would say B'yom Rosh Chodesh hazeh. So this right here is the paragraph of the special insertion that someone says on Rosh Chodesh, and it's done in the middle of Ritzeh, which is known in the Lashon of the Gemara. It's known as the bracha of Avodah. So our question is, what happens if someone made a mistake and did not mention Yaaleh Veyavo in Ritzeh? So the first thing that the Gemara says is he goes back to Ritzeh, Chozer la'avodah. Nizkar ba'odah. Let's say he missed it while he's still in Avodah. He missed it when he passed Ritzeh. Now he's in the bracha of Hoda'ah, which is the bracha of Modim. So now he's in the bracha of Modim already. Chozer la'avodah, he should go back to Ritzeh. So again, looking at the Sidur, let's say he finished Avodah, he started the bracha of Modim, which is the next bracha, and then he remembered. So the Gemara tells us, go back to Ritzeh. Okay, third case, Nizkar Besim Shalom. If he remembers it in Sim Shalom, which is now the last bracha, Chozer la'avodah, he goes back to Ritzeh. So going back to the Sidur, the next bracha after Modim is Sim Shalom. It's all the way, there's a lot here. It's all the way over here. If he remembers at this point that he had forgotten to include Yaaleh Veyavo, he goes back to Ritzeh. So far, so good. If he forgot as part of Ritzeh, go back to Ritzeh. If you forgot in Modim, go back to Ritzeh. If you forgot in Sim Shalom, go back to Ritzeh. So far, so good. But if he concluded the entire Amidah and he's done with the Amidah, Chozer LaRosh, he now needs to go back to the beginning of the Amidah, from Hashem Sifatei Tiftach Tilatecha, which means if the person forgot to say Yaaleh Veyavo and he remembered that he had forgotten to say it, as long as he's not done yet, he could go back to Ritzeh, pick up from Ritzeh, get himself a running start, say Yaaleh Veyavo, and finish it off. But if he finishes, he now needs to go back to the beginning of the Amidah. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to have two qualifying statements on this rule. And there's going to be two versions of one of the qualifying statements. So this rule that we just said, that if you forgot to say that Yaaleh Veyavo and you remembered before it's over, you could go back to Avodah. But if you remembered after it's over, you have to go back to the beginning of the Amidah. One more time. If you remembered before you finished, go back to Ritzeh. Whereas if you remembered after you finished, go back to the beginning. That's the statement. Let's qualify that statement. First qualification. Amar Rav Papa b'reid Rav Acha bar Ada, Hada Amran Siyem Chozer LaRosh. That which we said that if you're finished and you're done, you have to go back to the beginning. Lo Amran Elash Akaragla. That's only if you finished and you actually took a step back. Aval lo Akaragla. But if you didn't move your foot yet, even though you're done, even though you have nothing else to say, and you're finished, but you didn't pick up your foot to take your 3 steps back, Chozer la'avodah, you don't need to go back to the beginning. Are you done? Yes, you're done, but you didn't take your 3 steps back. Since you didn't take your 3 steps back, you can still go back to Ritzeh. Where this is a common, as we spoke about in shiur, is that let's say, for example, you're praying Amidah and you finish your Amidah and you look behind you and there's someone standing there. So you didn't take your 3 steps back. So you're done. You're done with your prayer, right? So the fact that we say you're done, if you're done, you have to go back to the beginning, but this case, you didn't take your 3 steps back, you're not considered done. So this opinion of Rav Papa is actually saving you in a situation where you didn't take your 3 steps back. You don't need to go back to the beginning. You just need to go back to Ritzeh. So Amarle, so they asked him, Minalach, how do you know this? Where did you learn this from? Amarle, Me'abamari Shemiali, I learned this from my father. Ve'abamari Merav, who learned it from his teacher, from Rav. So Rav is a very authoritative opinion, and he's essentially saying that this is a tradition that we learned from Rav. So that's the first thing, the first qualification of the statement, that if you forget Yaaleh Veyavo, then as long as you're not finished yet, you could go back to Avodah, go back to Ritzeh. But if you finished, you have to go back to the beginning. Rav Papa comes and says, in the name of Rav, that when I say you're finished, that means you had to have taken your 3 steps, or at least your first step. But if you didn't take your first step back, then you're still not finished, even though you're done and you have nothing else to say. Okay? Now, here's the second type of qualification, and there's going to be 2 versions of this. So, version 1, Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Hadaman akar raglav chozer larosh. Okay, now we just said, Rav just told us that if you picked up your foot, once you picked up your foot to take your 3 steps back, now you have to go back to the beginning, right? So that statement that we said that if you took a step back, you have to go back to the beginning. Lo amran ela she'enu ragil lomar tachanonim achar tiflato. That's only in a situation that when you take your 3 steps back, you're finished with the Amidah. Aval ragil omar tachanonim achar tiflato. But let's say there's someone that has a practice that he's going to start reading things while he's in that position. He took his steps back and he's now going to read more tachanonim and he's going to ask for more things. And he's going to say a parak of Tehillim and he's going to ask. Let's say that was the practice. Okay? If the person is going to say more things after taking 3 steps back, chozer la'avodah, then he's like, even though he took the steps, he's technically part of the Amidah still. So he could go back to Ritzeh. Okay? So this first statement from Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak actually makes things easier for you. That if you're in a situation that you took your 3 steps back, and now, I just remember that I missed the Yaaleh Veyavo, I have to go back to the beginning. Well, if you typically say things now, then you're safe. You're still in the groove of saying Amidah, you could just go back to Avodah. That's the first statement of Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. But now, it's not that it's another statement, it's another version of what Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak said. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, according to this version that we're about to learn, didn't say that. He actually said something else, which made it more strict. See, in this last statement, he made it easier for you. He said that you took 3 steps back. Look, if you're used to saying things, then you're still part of it. You don't need to go back to the beginning. Made it easier. But now this version of Rav Nachman is going to make things more difficult. Ika de Amri, Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Some say that Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak actually said the following: Ha de Amran ki lo akar raglav chozer la'avodah. Remember that we said that as long as you didn't pick up your foot, as long as you didn't pick it up, you don't need to go back to the beginning, even though you're done. You could go back to Avodah, go back to Ritzeh. Lo amran ela shiragil lomar tachanonim achar tiflato. That's only if you still have more things to say. Which means what? But if you're someone who you do not say things afterwards, meaning you take your 3 steps back and you're done and you don't have additional prayers to say, chozer larosh, then even though you did not take your steps back yet, but since you're done talking, because there's nothing else for you to say, you're going to take your 3 steps back and you're done, then chozer larosh, you have to go back to the beginning, even though you haven't taken your 3 steps back yet. So let's say this second version of Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak one more time. This version of Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak is going to make things more difficult for us, because he's going to say, you know how you told me that if I didn't take my 3 steps back, I'm still good to go, and I could go straight to Ritzeh because I haven't finished yet? That's only true if you have more to say once you take your 3 steps back. But when you take your 3 steps back, if you're over, if you're finished, then no, the 3 steps back are somewhat meaningless. Once you get up to the point that you're done talking, then you're done talking. And you might as well not even take your 3 steps back. Don't even take them back, because go straight to the beginning from Hashem Sefatay Tiftach V'Yagid Tilatecha. And this is the version of Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak that we actually hold like. We hold like this opinion of Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, which is to say that if you finish the Amidah, you said, you know what, let's look at the Siddur for a second. Okay, I want to just like put some markers around where we are. Where the Amidah actually finishes, and I'm just going to make this a little bit smaller for a second so we could see. Where the Amidah actually finishes is from the bracha of Sim Shalom. So once you say Hamavarech Atam Yiseh Shalom Amen, this is the end of the 19th and final bracha. It's really the 18th plus the Laminim. This is the end of the 19th and the final bracha. It's over. The Amidah is finished here. Now, what happens is that we actually have, and I wish there's a way for me to like, there probably is a way for me to be able to scroll, but whatever. So now here there is this line of Yaaleh Ratzon Imrei Fi Ve'Erion Levi Lefanecha Adonai Yisrael V'Gali. There's this line that we say once. We say this line the first time. Then we say Elokai Netzor. Sorry, yes. And then we say Yaaleh Ratzon Imrei Fi Ve'Erion Levi Lefanecha Hashem Yisrael V'Gali a second time. And then we take our 3 steps here. Okay? So now what happens in a situation where someone said this, check. Now he's over here. He wants to take his 3 steps back. He's about to take his 3 steps back, but he hasn't. So according to the second version of Nachman Bar Yitzchak, that you haven't taken your 3 steps back yet, right? But you're done. There's no more tefillot for you to say. It seems like we're not including Oseh Shalom B'Ramav here. Oseh Shalom B'Ramav is not included. We're talking about like asking for the type of things that we say up here. Maybe some people would say this paragraph after they took their 3 steps back. Okay, but since you are not, then the fact that you didn't take your 3 steps back is meaningless because there's nothing else for you to say. Which means, according to the second version of Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, once you say your second Yaaleh Ratzon Imrei Fi Ve'Erion Levi Lefanecha Adonai Yisrael V'Gali, and you're up to this spot right over here, that's it. If you now remember that you forgot to say Yaaleh Veyavo, you now have to go back to the beginning, and that's strict. That means like 3 steps back are not your saving grace. Okay. Now, with all of that, let's quickly see what Shulchan Aruch tells us is the halacha. So this is Shulchan Aruch in Siman Taf Kaf Bet 422. Let's read this halacha and what Shulchan Aruch says about Rosh Chodesh. Okay, so it's Rosh Chodesh, Arvit, and let me just annotate because it like helps me showing you where I'm up to. Let's do this color. I like this. Arvit, Shacharit, Mincha, Mitpalalim, Yudchet, Berachot. So on Rosh Chodesh, your Arvit, Shacharit, and Mincha is your regular Yudchet, it's your regular Amidah. Okay, that's fine. We don't have a unique prayer on Rosh Chodesh. Ve'omer Yaaleh Veyavo beretzeh. And you have to include the bracha of Yaaleh Veyavo in retzeh, which is what the Gemara called avodah. Okay? Now, case number 1 of forgetting. Okay? Let's say you forgot it in Arvit, and this is abbreviated. Ve'im lo amaro be'arvit. If one did not say Yaaleh Veyavo in Arvit, ein machzirin oto, the halacha is you do not need to go back and repeat it. Finished. If a person forgot to say Yaaleh Veyavo in Arvit, it doesn't matter when he remembered, he does not need to go back. Just keep going. It's fine. No looking back. Ben Rosh Chodesh Yom Echad, Ben Shu Shnei Yamim. Whether the Rosh Chodesh, it's a 1-day Rosh Chodesh or it's a 2-day Rosh Chodesh, it doesn't matter. For Arvit, if you forget to say Yaaleh Veyavo on Rosh Chodesh, one does not need to go back, because they would not sanctify the new moon in the evening. What does this mean? What this means is the process for which they used to sanctify the new moon, the times of the Sanhedrin, is that 2 witnesses would have to see the new moon in the evening time, because it could only be seen in the evening time, the new moon. They would see the new moon in the evening time, and then they would have to go to the court, the Sanhedrin, the high court, and tell them we saw the new moon last night. But the court was not open during the evening. They would only open during the daylight hours. So the night of Rosh Chodesh, 2 witnesses would see the new moon. The first chance they get, they would go to the court. That would be in the morning. Now they go to the court. They go to the court in the morning and they tell them, "We saw it. When did you see it? Last night." Okay. Machriz mekudash. It's Rosh Chodesh tonight. Which means as long as there was a Sanhedrin, they never had Rosh Chodesh in the evening. So since they never had Rosh Chodesh in the evening, because the courts would only open up in the daytime, if someone forgets to say Yaaleh Veyavo in the evening, we don't make him go back, because in the times of the Sanhedrin, there was no Rosh Chodesh in the evening time. Okay, and what I'll add is in the year 358 or 359 of the Common Era, that's when the courts no longer convened, the Supreme Court no longer convened, there was no more Sanhedrin, and they moved to a fixed calendar. But since up until then we had this practice that the Sanhedrin was open, that there was no Rosh Chodesh in the evening time, if someone forgets to say Yaaleh Veyavo in the evening time, Shulchan Aruch tells us you don't need to go back. And we'll see that later on in the Gemara. It's probably, I think it's on the next daf. So that's case number 1. Case number 1 is if someone forgot to say Rosh Chodesh in Arvit, what's the rule? Answer is, you keep going. You don't need to go back. Okay, now, Aval lo amaro shacharit or mincha, but if one did not say it in either shacharit or mincha, he forgot to say Yaaleh Veyavo, here's what we're going to say, machzirin oto. You have to go back. Okay, so far so good. Arvit, you don't need to go back. Shacharit, you do need to go back. Now, what do you go back to? Here we go. So I would call Arvit, where's Arvit? Over here. No. This is Arvit, this is case number 1. Then Mincha, Shacharit and Mincha is case number 2. But now it's like, where did you remember? So let's talk about 2a. 2a is V'im nizkar kodem sheitchil modim. If you didn't start modim yet, which means you're still in the bracha Ritzeh, you're still somewhere in Ritzeh, Omer bimkom sheniskar. You just say Yaaleh Veyavo exactly where you remembered. So let's say you're like Ritzeh Hashem Eloheinu Ha'esav V'yitzatam Sheva Hashem Alevi V'yibradeh V'ata Baracham Echayim Tachvos Banim V'titzenu V'tichazena Yaaleh Veyavo V'yagieh V'yareh. If you remembered before you started Modim, wherever you are, you just say Yaaleh Veyavo. You don't need to go back to anything. You just say it right where you are. Say Yaaleh Veyavo, and then you continue. Okay. Now there is a question of what happens if I said Baruch, also, you just say Yaaleh Veyavo. What happens if I say Baruch Atah Hashem? What happens if I say the name of Hashem? So what the halacha will say is that since you're already saying the name of Hashem as part of the bracha, it's actually better not to say Yaaleh Veyavo right there. It's better to say the words Lamedeni Chukecha. Baruch Atah Adonai Lamedeni Chukecha. Why? Because Baruch Atah Adonai Lamedeni Chukecha is a pasuk in Tehillim. And what you're really doing is like you have in football is you're improvising, you're calling an audible. When you started saying Baruch Atah Hashem, you're saying the words as part of the text of a blessing, of a bracha. But once you realize like, oh, I'm not ready to finish this blessing yet because I forgot to say Yaaleh Veyavo, you do a pivot and you switch from saying the text of a blessing to saying a line of Tehillim, one of the Psalms, one of a pasuk in Tehillim. So when someone says Baruch Atah Adonai Lamedeni Chukecha, that's a pasuk in Tehillim. And then he says that, and then he says Yaaleh Veyavo V'yagieh V'yira'eh, and he continues. Okay? But it seems like from Shulchan Aruch that let's say he said Baruch Hashem HaMachazir Shechenato LeTzion, but it's before Kodem Sheitchil Modim. He did not say the words of Modim yet. Since he did not begin the words of Modim, just say Yaaleh Veyavo. Say Yaaleh Veyavo where you are, and then you continue with Modim. Some will say that no, you should go back to Ritzeh at that point. It's machloket. But essentially, this is what Shulchan Aruch is saying, is that as long as you have not begun Modim yet, you just say it where you are, considering the factors of what happens if you actually said it, Baruch Atah Hashem. Okay. Now, let's say, so now we're going to go to 2b. It was after Modim. V'im niskar, lo niskar, achar shitchil Modim. Now he's in a situation where he already started Modim. Now it's going to depend how far you got. Im niskar kodem sheishlim tefilato. So if you didn't finish yet, what do? Chozer l'ritzeh. As long as you didn't finish yet, you just go back to ritzeh. So this is the second case that it's shacharit or mincha. I forgot. I already started Modim, but I didn't finish yet. You go back to ritzeh. V'im lo niskar ad sheishlim tefilato. But if you're finished the whole thing, chozer l'rosh, you have to go back to the beginning. And then Shulchan Aruch tells us, "Ve'im hu ragil lomar tachanunim achar tiflato v'niskar achar sheishlim tiflato kodem she'akor raglav chozer l'ritzeh." And then he says, and if you're in a situation that you finish the Amidah by saying Sim Shalom, Havarach Adam Yisrael Shalom, Amen, but you still have more to say, and you haven't taken your 3 steps back, then you just go back to Ritzeh. So what this effectively means, and this is to see, what this effectively means is that until that second Yilur Ratzonim Refi, then you can go back to Ritzeh. But once you finish that second Yilur Ratzonim Refi, that you're at a point where now there's nothing else for me to say, and I'm going to take my 3 steps back. Once you get to that point, that's it. It's as though you took your 3 steps back, and you have to go back to the beginning. So that's why there's really 4 answers to this question. What happens if I forgot to say Yaaleh Veyavo in my Amidah on Rosh Chodesh? What's the answer? The answer is there's 4 potential answers. If it's Arvit, nothing. You're done. It's okay. You don't need to do anything. Now, answer number two is that if it's Shacharit or Mincha, I would have to go back. Go back to what? Well, three options. If you're in the middle of Ritzeh, just say the words Yaaleh Veyavo. So, v'tachazin anena b'shuvcha letzion v'rachamim, or Yaaleh Veyavo v'yagia v'yareh. So that's the first option. The second option is you already started Modim before the second Yuler Ratzon that you're going to say at the end before you take it three steps back. Anywhere there, go back to the beginning of Ritzeh, Hashem v'yitzvatam, go back to the beginning of Ritzeh. And if it's at the point where he took his three steps back, or even right before he took his three steps back, but there's nothing else for him to say, then you have to go back to the beginning for Mincha and Shacharit. So this is the law of what happens if someone forgets to say Yaaleh Veyavo on Rosh Chodesh. We're going to stop here. Although the shiur that we had went longer, I'm going to break it up this way so that this is a self-contained topic, the topic of missing Yaaleh Veyavo on Rosh Chodesh. Hopefully we will continue with another video very soon. Thank you.